I'm Mara Bennett, and I'm 32 years old. I discovered my younger sister confined in a cupboard under my parents' stairs at my grandmother's funeral banquet 2 years ago. Ella is 22. No hand inside could ever reach the strong brass lock on the exterior of the door. To keep the visitors from hearing her knock, someone had turned on the dryer in the next room. I work as a paramedic. Nothing on any of the 9 years I've spent stepping into the worst periods of others' life has prepared me for the hallway of my own family. I believed that the solution was to get her out of that closet. It wasn't. It was terrible what I dragged her into. And more sinister than both was what I discovered hidden in my family's history. However, my parents overlooked one aspect of me. We are not allowed to turn away at work. I lost everything the last time I opened the door. I made the decision that the expense would go someplace else this time. Welcome back to Inheritance Chronicles, where one tale at a time, family secrets are revealed. Stories like my sister's don't get told nearly enough, so if you think the quietest member of the family should be heard, please leave a comment below and make sure to subscribe. The town where your last name is a shop is Millbrook, Ohio, where I grew up. For 3 generations, Bennett Hardware has been located on Main Street. On Sundays, my father, Harold, passed the collecting plate and operated the register. Everything else, including how we were seen, was controlled by my mother, Diane. I was 10 years old when Ella was born. Before she could walk steadily, she arranged spoons according to color. When the Finches hit the feeder, she flapped her hands as if she may take off with them since she loved birds with all of her heart. My mother asked, "Who else would have access to the file?" When a specialist in Columbus mentioned autism to her when she was 4 years old. After that, there was no school, speech therapy, or early intervention. A tutor who entered via the back door was paid in cash and told a narrative about a weakened immune system for the church. The closet was located under the stairs. In the summer of Ella's 5th birthday, my mother cleaned everything out. A coloring book basket, a cushion, and a flashlight. She referred to it as the quiet room, and she vowed that Ella sometimes chose it. She was harmed by loud rooms. Even so, I might see it, but you don't lock the exterior of a door your kid chooses. Just before the church potluck passed via our home that autumn, the latch went up. I saw my father turn the screws as I stood in the hallway. When my mother checked the lock, I recall the sound it made. Like a period at the conclusion of a text that no one would ever be permitted to read, this little brass click is tidy and definitive. I was 15. Since then, I've detested that sound every day. When I realized it was wrong, people asked. At 8, 11, and 15, I was aware. When you live with your father, knowing and being able to accomplish something are 2 distinct things. Half of the crowd entered in our front door on the Christmas I was 18. 8-year-old Ella had a pleasant morning. She began to rock, and my mother brought her down the hall with a dish of cookies and slipped the latch as the house filled with scent and chatter. 20 minutes into supper, I heard her pounding instead of wailing under the music. Like someone being courteous about drowning, the knock was steady and patient. In the midst of my father's toast, I stood up, opened the door, and took her outside in front of everyone. You would have assumed that I had entered the room with a corpse. The peaceful room was a family choice, my father said as he led me onto the porch by the elbow. I informed him that a lock is not a choice. It's a cage. He gave me a push. I pushed back more forcefully when I was 18 and stupid, and he passed through the screen door. The cops were contacted by the neighbors. My father informed them that his daughter was out of control while standing under the red and blue lights, bleeding from one eyebrow. A trial would humiliate the family, so I entered a misdemeanor plea. My mother said such things. That evening, she cleaned up the glass and said, "Family means nobody has to know." She was referring to the altercation. She was referring to Ella. For all time, she meant everything. That week, I prepared a duffel bag. I kneeled by the closet door and knocked twice before leaving that residence. Gentle. Our signal was 2 knocks. "It's me. You're secure." She returned the knock. Through the wood, I promised to return for her. I can't change the portion of this narrative that took me 14 years. Millbrook is 2 hours away from Columbus. which for 14 years may have been another nation. I enrolled in the EMT course because it was quick and challenging, and it turned out that I was suited for it. You learn a particular math while working on a medical truck for 9 years. The airway comes first. First, deal with what kills. Every birthday, I sent Ella a gift, colored pencils and a bird book, the nice sort. The parcels vanished within that home for 3 years, and I allowed myself to think she had received them. The package was marked and returned to the sender in my mother's handwriting after the 4th year. Mom answered the phone like she was reading a statement to the media. Ella is doing well. Ella is doing well. Ella doesn't have to be perplexed. There was just one time my father spoke over the phone, and it was brief. I still had a record. He was still represented by a lawyer. He would label it stalking and allow a court to see the trend if I approached Ella once more. Nevertheless, I made 2 trips down. On both occasions, I witnessed my dad turn the sign to closed while sitting in my vehicle across from Bennett Hardware. My hands hurt on the wheel as I drove back to Columbus. Call it a weakness. On certain occasions, I do, but no one is saved by a lady with a criminal record who pushes beyond a warning. The girl in the closet pays for the sequel when she gives them a villain with her own face on it. I remained away and became rather skilled at chest compressions as a result. Then, on a gloomy Tuesday in February, my grandmother's attorney contacted the station and asked to speak with me directly. Ruth Bennett had vanished. At 84, she had heart failure while sleeping. The odd part came next. Regarding the funeral, she had given instructions. She wanted to make sure Mara showed up, he informed me. The funeral was as lovely as a storefront display. A printed program on thick paper with white lies that matched the ribbon. My family, all in matched blue, fills the first pew. The minister referred to us as a cohesive family. My mother tipped her chin as if the words were a crown. I took a seat 3 rows back. I didn't get a seat reserved. A little guy in a brown suit later discovered me behind the coat rack at my parents' home's reception. Bill Hartman served as my grandmother's attorney for 40 years. He had the eyes of a guy who doesn't miss much and the handshake of a man who bills honestly. He informed me that Grandma Ruth had left Ella a special needs trust worth little more than $200,000, which was intended to pay for treatment, care, and a normal life, until the specifics were resolved by the court. My father's elder sister, Aunt Catherine served as the interim trustee. Hartman then dropped his voice and leaned in closer. When Ruth signed the documents, she had mentioned something. He revealed to me something he had been considering for the last 2 years. He asked me whether I understood what she meant when she tapped the trust paperwork and stated, "So it never happens again." I didn't. Then, no. In any case, I was only half paying attention since I had begun to count heads at a scene without really intending to. Deacons by the ham, cousins by the coffee. Cups that were already full were refilled by my mother. Everyone was accounted for, with the exception of the individual for whom the funds were intended. There was no sign of my sister in the living room. She wasn't in the yard or the kitchen, and I heard an incomprehensible sound at a funeral under the murmur of 50 courteous voices coming from my parents' rear hallway. The washer was operating. At a funeral, nobody washes laundry. I followed the sound via the corridor where I was raised. What turned out to be 2 towels fell as the dryer pounded away behind the door of the laundry room. The closet is behind it, under the stairs. The previous latch has vanished. It was replaced with a new one that was slid shut, solid brass, and gleaming against 14 years of paint. I grabbed it under the rhythm of the dryer. Steady and faint, a knock, tolerant and courteous about drowning. According to my teaching, and announce yourself. I performed the only rendition of that I am aware of. I gently knocked twice. Inside, the pounding ceased. Then there were 2 knocks again. My 22-year-old sister was sitting on a bean bag between the winter jackets with a coloring book on her knees and headphones over her ears as I entered the door. Thinner than any picture I had ever seen. When there is a ceiling in their environment, individuals become pale. She gave me a long look, and I watched as she positioned myself. The years, the altered face, everything. Then she extended her hand and struck the floor twice with her knuckles. "It's me. You're secure." My mother's shadow passed over us both while I remained on my knees in front of her. Mom added, lowering her voice, "She likes it in there." Visitors within earshot. "Mara, it's her safe haven." She requested to enter. With his mouth clenched, my father emerged behind her. "He advised not to cause a commotion during your grandmother's funeral." A scene. The family faith was there, and at last my blasphemy had a name. As I stared at the gleaming new latch, which was screwed in at adult height on the outside, a single, calm, and clear thought came to me, the kind that happens when adrenaline is genuine. Peace is not the same as quiet. As my folks watched, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the latch. I then assisted my sister in entering the light. In less than a minute, I had everything laid out in my mind. A Columbus motel calls in the morning, and Ella is in my pickup. As if he had been waiting for it, my father watched me do the arithmetic. After that, he returned with a folder from the study. In the same manner that you would lay down a winning hand, he placed it on the kitchen counter between us. County probate court guardianship letters with an elevated seal. The co-guardians of Ella Ruth Bennett, an adult with disabilities, are Harold and Diane Bennett. Signed the summer of her 18th birthday. I was unaware for 4 years since the hearing notice was sent to family, and the night I passed via a screen door, I ceased to be family. My father whispered softly, "You take her out that door." It's the kidnapping of a ward. A lady with a record, your word against ours. We both realized that he was correct, and I detested him in a way that I had never felt for any other person before or since. I want you to know this because it's important for everything that follows. The toughest right choice of my life was leaving that home without my sister. A locked door cannot be defeated by smashing it. By obtaining the key lawfully and permanently in a manner that no one can ever slide shut again, you defeat it. Ella was sitting with her coloring book when I knelt next to her. I rapped twice on the arm of her chair, and she knocked twice in return. Then, carrying keys that felt like 40 pounds, I went outside to my vehicle. When I emerged, Aunt Catherine was there on the porch, 64-year-old with a steel gray hairdo and folded arms like a gatekeeper. "Mara, you always enjoyed kicking doors open." "Some doors are closed for a reason," she remarked. Later, I would recall that statement while holding a picture of 2 young boys in a lawyer's office. I phoned Adult Protective Services from the Columbus station parking lot on Monday morning and told them everything. The guardianship, the lock, the picture, and the 4 years of missing medical documents that I suspected but was unable to verify. Without any drama, the intake worker removed it, and a caseworker called *Ms. that week Park ** was assigned, and I had my first system instruction. Before it enters, the system knocks. A guardianship welfare check is arranged. To be scheduled is to be alerted. When Ms. Park finally appeared in my parents' hallway, folded card tables and a vacuum cleaner were kept in the closet under the stairs. Ella sat in the nice armchair with a puzzle that had been cleaned and polished like an exhibit, and the clasp had been removed with 4 tidy holes puttied over. The coffee cake was presented by my mother. In the same manner that he does in front of an audience, my father softly recited scripture. Ella remained silent, but she often spoke to strangers, and no one in that home had ever offered her an other response. The first results were cautiously worded and could not be verified. I sat in my vehicle reading that line for so long that my coffee became cold. However, below that discovery, 2 things occurred, neither of which I was aware of until much later. Initially, the file was not closed by Ms. Park. She highlighted the case for a full guardianship review, which required a courtroom, a judge, and sworn responses, because she had a problem with a 22-year-old lady who had not had a doctor on file for 4 years. Second, my picture of the lock ended up in that file, and files tend to come to light just when people hope they won't. All of it was unknown to me. All I knew was that the papers had grinned back at a caseworker who had stood 6 feet away from my sister. You understand precisely how the journey back to Columbus felt if you've ever sat across from an official. knowing that the truth was in the room, but seeing the paperwork indicate otherwise. Stay with me because what the court did next is worse than anything my parents did, and no one ever tells you about it. And please take a moment to press subscribe if you think that folks like my sister should be seen. It really makes these experiences more accessible to the families who are now experiencing them. My parents were unable to go beyond the guardianship review's one requirement, an impartial medical assessment conducted by a doctor selected from the court's roster. And doctor was the name that appeared. Park Evelyn. I could have given the cashier who sketched it a hug. Up until my parents determined that Ella's follow-up visits were becoming a subject at church, Dr. Park, who operated the developmental clinic 2 counties over, was the expert who had treated Ella as a young child. At the age of 55, she had the bedside patience of a lady who had been deceived by anxious parents for 30 years. Her report was 4 pages of silent destruction and 40 minutes of meeting time. A lady whose childhood chart had shown her learning letters had no doctor on file for 4 years, no dental treatment that anybody could record, and a general decline in her abilities. And then the scene in a courtroom hallway that made me feel sick to my stomach. Doctor. Park placed a simple communication tablet, the kind with image buttons and a keyboard that Ella had never been given, on the table as part of the assessment. My sister needed some time to touch it. Then, the first thing anybody had heard from her in years, she pecked out 1 letter at a time. Emma R.A., not mom, not help, my name, doctor. Park said in her report that the ward had communication potential that had been ignored for years, and that, in her professional judgment, this constituted neglect of care. When Bill Hartman phoned me that evening, I inquired whether the judge's decision to just give her to me immediately meant the case was ended. I didn't enjoy the pause. You need to hear it twice, he added, since removing one guardian is not the same as selecting the next. The fact that my parents were never officially removed tells you everything about the conflicts in my family. On the morning of the hearing, their attorney came up and said that, due to health concerns, they were voluntarily stepping down as guardians. Their reputations were undiscoverable via a check of court documents. Suddenly, the only issue in the courtroom was who would take over. There was no finding of negligence or anything else, just a smooth move to the side. Additionally, Judge Carol Maddox had 2 petitions on her desk. My life was read out like a rap sheet by my Aunt Catherine's attorney, Prescott a slick operator. Attacking the ward's father is a misdemeanor. 14 years away. 2 hours away is a 1-bedroom apartment. A work with no defined timetable, holidays, and 24-hour shifts. What happens to a vulnerable woman alone in an apartment in Columbus while her sister works a full day and night on an ambulance? I watched Judge Maddox write something down, and I knew the answer was nothing good. He asked the court in a gentle and reasonable manner. Catherine then took the stand in her Sunday coat, and she was outstanding. I'll give it to her. 10 minutes away from anything Ella knows is a large farmhouse. Walter is a retired spouse who spends his days at home. Letters of support from half the church and the pastor. Instead of showing up to funerals upset, Prescott added, families should take the initiative. Judge Maddox took 20 minutes to render his decision. Catherine Fletcher is given temporary custody of the trust and guardianship of the individual, with a 1-year visiting plan for the sister review. My aunt pressed her lips to my ear and gave me a public embrace on the courtroom steps. We keep our own Mara, she said. You'll see. It took me 3 weeks to comprehend my aunt's meaning of keeping. This is the reality I must accept. I wanted to believe the first visit. For 30 years, Catherine and Walter operated a farmhouse on Route 9, just outside their little hotel, the Hillside Motor Lodge, which had 12 rooms and a gravel lot. In addition to fresh cookies and a birdhouse that Walter had nailed to the window frame level, the work of a guy who still took pleasure in a straight screw, Catherine showed me a bedroom that had been painted yellow because someone had informed her that Ella loved yellow. Ella calmly ate a puzzle while seated at the kitchen table. After that, I took a seat in my vehicle and breathed for the first time in 2 months. Perhaps the system had stumbled into something respectable. However, I brought home 2 items from that kitchen. The way little errors follow you out of a potentially disastrous call. The first was Catherine's speech pattern. While my sister sat there, every remark regarding Ella was said in the third person and passed over Ella's head. Now she eats well. All that screen gibberish is unnecessary for her. Regularity is best for her. A list of chores in Catherine's handwriting, including towels, sweeping, and rooms, had taken the place of Ella's pictorial schedule, the small handwritten week she had maintained since Dr. After Park's visit. The second item was a blank square of wallpaper that was brighter than anything else on the stairwell wall, surrounded by a row of family portraits marching up the stairs, weddings, fair ribbons, and my father as a young man in front of the business. The dimensions of a little picture frame. Someone had removed something that had hung there for decades, long enough to cast a shadow across the page. I made no inquiry. I ought to have inquired. On a Thursday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ella was enrolled in the Bright Path Adult Day program in Millbrook 3 days a week, thanks to Dr. Park's report, which made everyone in the courtroom grin. Rachel Alvarez *** has 20 years of experience in this sector. Rachel had stopped grinning. With a formal letter stating the expense, Catherine had quickly removed Ella. Although Bright Path wasn't inexpensive, it was precisely what my grandmother's trust was meant to cover, and the court document referred to it as a non-essential cost, protecting the ward's assets. Ella's medical treatment was transferred from Dr. Park's clinic to a telehealth service the same week due to a change of provider form. The paperwork indicated it was more convenient. It didn't specify for whom. That evening, Rachel spent a lot of time talking to me, meticulous, expert, and crystal clear. She said, "I've been doing this for 20 years. Shorten the visits, transfer the doctor to a screen, or discontinue the program when a new guardian moves for the first 3. Budgeting isn't that. The eyes are turned off by it." She knew she had a sensation that was consuming her, but she was unable to express it. Reporters under mandate must have a story to report. So, given my position, I took the only action I could. I submitted a request for the trust accounting via Hartman, which any interested family member may seek be compelled by the court. Since Grandma's death, Catherine has served as trustee. Initially as a provisional appointment, followed by approval from the court. She had been using my sister's money, though. The proceeds were now owing to a judge. 3 weeks later, the accountant returned, and before I had even completed my shift, Hartman phoned. He reminded me that my grandmother's attorney had said the trust could pay for a lifetime of care. Then he added, "Mara, the accounting they filed is 1 page long." As the attorneys argued over that 1 page, I continued to make my planned visits, but they continued to become shorter. Third, before I removed my coat, I realized what was lacking. Ella's room had lost the communication tablet that Dr. Park had received from her clinic prior to the move. Catherine didn't even put up a show. She claimed to be hiding behind that object while wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning. We converse like humans in this home. With her hands quietly resting in her lap, my sister sat at the kitchen table. Since I consistently arrived on the same day, she would have known I was coming the whole way over, and there was nothing on that table to respond to me. She made a low gasp in her throat and clutched my jacket sleeve in her hand as I gave her a farewell embrace. Like something removed from behind a door, a single long M protruded. I have been transporting individuals out of auto accidents for 9 years on a truck. I can still hear the sound at night. I voiced my displeasure with the tablet to Hartman over the week. The court received Catherine's response, which was a work of art. She kept a behavior record in her own neat writing, noting that the ward was disturbed, didn't sleep, and rejected activities after each visit from the sister. With sadness, she advised guardians to oversee shorter visits for Ella's personal stability. I finally understood the game the way you comprehend ice beneath your boots when I was sitting in my vehicle on the side of Route 9 with that letter. My aunt didn't have to demonstrate her virtues. All the court could see was paper, and she was in charge of every piece of paper that came out of that farmhouse. Catherine did not have to be correct. She just needed me to seem incorrect. Thus, we became wiser. I refer to the two ladies who salvaged this tale as we. Dr. Park was still included in the telehealth transition file on paper. She even used Catherine's own documents against her. The patient required a device with communication software as long-term medical assistance if care was being transferred to a screen, in accordance with the examination that the court had mandated. Telehealth had been Catherine's pick. Telehealth must have a tablet. Refusing the pill was equivalent to rejecting the physician she had selected on file. In triplicate, graciously checkmate. Rachel made it. A spare tablet. Ella had discovered the same communication app. The program's data were used to recover her former visual vocabulary. Everything was arranged as her hands had recalled it. And since the handoff took place at the church picnic, in front of the pastor, the potato salad, and everyone whose positive opinion my family had been purchasing for 50 years, I was given the opportunity to be the delivery lady. Like every other Tuesday, I placed the tablet at a picnic table in front of my sister. I informed Catherine that the deacons could hear the medical equipment. A court-mandated examination follow-up. Call Dr. Park at any time. Ella's hands lingered over it for a long while before she regained her rhythm, as if she had never lost it. Icons, keyboard, and home screen, and then my sister did something that neither Rachel nor I had anticipated. She launched the button editor on her own, wrote one letter at a time, selected yellow, the largest button size, and saved her own message on her voice's main page. I'm not a mystery. On top of the potato salad, the tablet spoke out in its flat, tiny voice as soon as she pushed it once. I anticipated anger as I gazed up at my aunt. It was terrible what was on her face. Like a woman witnessing a ghost, Catherine had become as pale as paper. Judge Maddox did not get the one-page accounting. When the court's complete revised file with supporting paperwork arrived, Hartman threw it all over his desk. In 14 months as trustee, my aunt moved nearly $70,000 of my sister's money into the gravity of that motel. He was reconstructing caregiver reimbursement to Catherine Fletcher for services. No outside agency had ever been hired to provide room renovation for the ward, with the exception of the invoice from a commercial roofer, and the roof in the photos was the Hillside Motor Lodges. A used pickup titled to Walter was justified as ward transportation. My grandma had been purchasing shingles so that it wouldn't happen again. Hartman was truthful about our possessions and shortcomings. You need a prosecutor for criminal charges, and prosecutors need time, hunger, and referrals. However, the probate court required a review of the guardianship itself based on an accounting such as this, and he filed for one before the end of the week. Catherine responded using paper and pedigree, like she always did. Receipts for everything, justifications for the ward's advantages from a steady family property, and yet another kind letter from the pastor. She counterpunched after that. We were affected by my visits, noting the scenario at the picnic and the behavior log. That term once more, and my visits were completely stopped while the review was ongoing. On a Tuesday, while reading Hartman's email in the station parking lot and covering the screen with my thumb to keep it from shaking, I discovered this. My sister was waiting for the day of the week when I usually brought her tablet, if they had even left it in her room, somewhere on Route 9, and no one was going to tell her why I wasn't coming. The town discreetly chose its side at the gas pump and register, just as small towns do. By then, I had moved into a leased apartment in Millbrook, which was 10 minutes distant rather than 2 hours away. I transferred to a station that served the whole county, and I could feel the heat every place I went. The Bennett girl, who had the record returned, was causing financial problems for the family that intervened. A folded paper, like a parking ticket, was slipped under my wiper by a church buddy who relayed the news to me. See the damage you're causing to this family. Not signed. I'd know, she knew. Then Walter gave me a 40-second call, a number that didn't return calls. My 66-year-old uncle, who I had seen hanging a birdhouse with a level, spoke quickly and softly like a guy in a home where the floors are accountable to someone. The girl was transferred to the hotel by her. According to room 14, it's while the bedroom is being redone. The key is kept on her ring, Mara. After he hung up, I tried calling again, but it didn't work, so I sat with my phone in my hand and did the arithmetic I didn't want to do. A follow-up was planned at the farmhouse by APS. In every file, the address was the farmhouse. Ella had a yellow bedroom with a birdhouse by the window, at least on paper. My 22-year-old sister was really sleeping in room 14 of a rural hotel at the far end of the lot, beyond the ice maker, where no caseworker had any reason to knock. I had learnt the same lesson, as had my aunt. Paper appears to the system. The reality had no chance of being as good on paper as she was. Pharmacists see things that courtrooms do not, which is why Dr. Park spotted the next thread. As part of the review file, Ella's refill history came across her desk, and the pattern caught her attention like an incorrect beat on a monitor. A telehealth physician who had never seen my sister in person prescribed a sedative drug that began modestly shortly after Catherine took over, increased twice subsequently, and was renewed on schedule. That drug has acceptable applications. When the patient is not seen by anybody, there is no acceptable version of the dosage rising. Park did what reporters are required to do. She personally sent a complaint to APS, and she exerted enough pressure on the telehealth service to flag the account for an in-person visit before to the subsequent prescription. Finally, it was paper versus paper, but each move was still timed by the system clock. APS visited the farmhouse listed in the documentation. The home was tidy. The yellow room was set out like a page from a catalog. Warm as pie, Catherine added that Ella was staying with a relative for a few days. It's unfortunate to miss them. The ward is out of sight, taken note of. The calendar indicated 10 days for a follow-up. On a Friday afternoon while standing in the ambulance bay, I received that news from Ms. Park's office. And I recall doing the conversion that is always playing in my mind while staring at the apparatus behind me. Emergencies are measured in minutes in my work. They are measured in appointments by the system. For 10 days, I spent 240 hours with my sister sedated on a stranger's signature behind a door that I was not allowed to enter. Additionally, the first significant heat of the summer was predicted for that weekend. Besides Sunday, it was in the mid-90s, hot enough to transform the last chamber beside the ice maker into a kiln. My mother knocked on the door of my leased flat on Saturday night. We had been in a room by ourselves for the first time in 14 years. God help me, she had brought a casserole like a housekeeper visiting a sick relative. She placed it on my counter and glanced about at my folding chairs and my medic bag in the corner. I saw her documenting everything as proof of a misguided life. This is what my mom did not do. She did not refute any of it. Not the money, not the closet, not the latch. Denial was for those who had no other choice. My mom was a negotiator. She smoothed a wrinkle off my dish towel and added, "Drop the money business. It's beneath us and nasty, and once she's not being assaulted, Catherine will become softer. Go home. Come to church with us in a year. No one tells this tale. Mara, we can be a family once again. Family implies no one has to be aware." The very same words that she had said over a dustpan of shattered glass 14 years before are now presented to me as a gift, akin to a key to the house's good rooms. And at last I heard the phrase for what it had always been, a pricing list, not a privacy guideline. Silence was the currency, and everything in that home had always been for sale. And those who were unable to argue were the ones that paid. The last shot was fired when she was at the door. You have no idea what your grandmother buried to keep this family standing. Ask yourself why that trust exists at all. After saying, "You think you're the first person in this family to make noise about how we do things," she left, leaving the casserole on my counter like a hostage and her heels on the stairwell. For a long time, I stood by the window. People wonder why I didn't just grab my sister and go, and I want you to hear the direct response. The family receives the only resolution they have ever desired when a lady with a criminal background snatches a ward. Mara the danger. Ella is the eternal mystery. I know you're out there, so please share in the comments if you've ever had to battle slowly while every part of you cried out to fight quickly. To sign up because my pager went off at 4 the next morning, with the Hillside Motor Lodge as the location. According to the transmission, a woman in her 20s was discovered roaming on Hillside Motor Lodge Route 9, perhaps with disturbed mental condition. Before we passed the first light, I informed my companion Dana Reyes, who was driving, of my sister's whereabouts. I knew the address in the same way that you know a stove is hot. Clan. I document, you take the lead, and everything is done twice. Dana just gave a nod and depressed the pedal. Ella was standing barefoot on stones in yesterday's clothing, swinging like a tree in the first light of dawn on the gravel lot. She was discovered by a truck driver who had stopped for ice and had the guts to call. When Dana squeezed her skin, it tented and her lips broke. Dehydration that was visible from a distance. Her pupils were sluggish and her eyes were swimming, a sedative fog that doesn't come from a single lousy night. The lights from the rig made her wince until I turned off everything save the low beams. The only way that has ever worked is for me to declare myself. There are 2 gentle taps on the stretcher's side. She turned her head, extended her hand, and gave my forearm 2 knocks. Then, like the most courageous patient I've ever met, she allowed us to work. The trucker had seen the door to room 14 swinging, and it was now open. The bathroom window at the rear stood open with the screen pulled out from within, and a padlock, the ugly cousin of the latch, was screwed into the frame at adult height. My sister had crawled out of a window that was hardly larger than a suitcase when she was medicated and cooking in a closed area as the heat-in. She had not strayed. She'd saved herself. Catherine came across the lot in her robe as we were loading her. Guardianship documents stating that the hospital was not necessary were physically in hand. Family deals with family. Lead medic is Dana. God will always bless her. I didn't even glance up. "Ma'am, we can meet your paperwork at County General," she said. I could see what Ella had gripped beneath her arm in the background light. A tablet, one corner of the screen fractured. Holding her voice, she had gone out the window. Since hospitals produce more paper than any other facility in America, they are the only place where paper meets its equal. The emergency department worked Ella up and the chart said, "What charts say?" No adjectives, all knives, dehydration requiring fluids, sedative level above the therapeutic range for the listed prescription. Weight well below her documented weight from Dr. Park's evaluation the year before. Old marks at the wrists that the attending noted in language I'm not going to repeat here, except to say, she photographed them for the record with the same flat care she'd give a burn. Every one of those people is a mandated reporter by 7 that morning. The hospital had called APS by 9. Park was in the hallway, and this time nothing was staged, and the finding wrote itself substantiated. When Catherine arrived with her letters, the hospital did the beautiful bureaucratic thing and refused discharge. Unsafe environment pending investigation, and there is no charm and no pastor's letter that moves an attending physician with a chart like that in her hand. I was off shift and in the waiting room when they let me back. Ella was rehydrated, propped up, tablet on her lap, cracked corner and all. She pressed her yellow button and the flat little voice said, "I am not a secret." Then she typed and pressed again, "Don't go," so I didn't. That afternoon, from a chair beside her bed, I signed a sworn statement laying out everything. The funeral, the latch, the closet I grew up watching, my parents, my aunt, dates, photographs, all of it. And Hartman filed an emergency petition to suspend Catherine that same day, and the court named a guardian at Leam for Ella before the week was out. My mother reached the ward's hallway around dinner, and a social worker met her at the line the hospital had drawn and turned her around. Mom looked at me over that woman's shoulder, and she didn't raise her voice at all. "You didn't save this family," she said. "You ended it." She was half right. 2 days later, Hartman called me to his office, and there was a banker's box on his desk with a dead woman's handwriting on the lid. When Ruth signed the trust, He said she also left this sealed with instructions to open it only if the trust ever ended up in a fight. He looked tired. "I'd say this qualifies," he said, and cut the tape. Inside was the answer to a question I hadn't known enough to ask. On top, a photograph, black and white, 2 little boys in front of Bennett Hardware. The taller one, unmistakably my father at about 8, grinning, his arm around a smaller boy with a crooked collar and eyes that didn't meet the camera. I turned it over. In pencil, in my grandmother's hand, 2 names, Harold and Timmy. Under the photo, a folder, and I read it standing up because sitting felt wrong. An admission record from Ridgeway State School, hours away for Thomas Austin, age 6. The intake form's reason for placement, typed by some clerk more than 50 years ago, said the family is unable to manage the child's condition in the community. Receipts monthly, 3 years of them, my grandmother's checks to an institution. Then a death certificate, Timmy Bennett, age 9, pneumonia, and a single line from the school's office. In actuality, as a receipt for shingles, burial on facility property, marker 114. My dad had a younger sibling. There was a younger brother for Catherine. At 6, he was unique in the same way that Ella is. And for 50 years, this family took him out of every narrative, placed him in a vehicle, and informed the community that he had moved in with cousins. At last, Catherine's stairwell wall's blank rectangle had a name. My grandmother's punishment also prevented it from happening in the future. Estate planning was not what the trust intended. In the only money my family ever used, it was a confession. I told Hartman that I needed a day to prepare for the hearing and place the picture in my jacket. I had to see the eyes of the lone survivor who had witnessed the automobile drive off. That week, Catherine tried to see Ella in the hospital, but was turned away at the desk. I requested her to sit with me in the chapel instead of having security escort her out because I wanted to know precisely what I was fighting, had a picture in my pocket, and needed to make a case. I placed the 2 boys' photo on the seat between us. My aunt gave me the few unguarded moments of her life in a voice that sounded like gravel. She looked at it the way you would look at a wound reopening. When their mother dressed Timmy in his church attire on a typical Tuesday, she was 10 years old. He was visiting relatives downstate. They informed the school. The physicians said that their 2 visits disturbed the residents. Because shame was like gravity and physicians were like pastors back then, it was better to let him adapt, and their parents complied. When the box of ashes arrived, she was 13, and there was no funeral. And her mother spent the whole afternoon ironing sheets, as if the iron were the only thing preventing the house from rising off the ground. My aunt then doubled down and gave me a dry-eyed stare. And here is the point where I need you to sit with me since it finally expresses my family's whole credo. You don't give the state your family. Timmy was returned home in a box by Mara, the state. I did all in my power to keep that girl out of a place like Ridgeway. If you had carried it as long as I have, you would have followed suit. The one thing that both my career and my upbringing agree on is that I kept my voice low. I responded, "Aunt Catherine, fear didn't sign those reimbursement checks. You convinced yourself it was a rescue when you renovated Timmy's room with the lock on the outside." She smoothed her coat, got to her feet, and left me sitting under the little electric altar candles. Prescott was waiting next to my vehicle in the parking garage. He added, "My clients have a proposal. I'll grant that the offer was wonderfully crafted and arrived written on thick letterhead. With immediate effect, Catherine steps down as guardian and trustee. On the record, my parents endorse my petition. In less than a week, Ella and I return home. No trial, no contest. The modified trust accounting is sealed by consent in return. Both parties sign a declaration referring to the whole year as a family dispute that was settled in private, and neither party refers the matter to the county prosecutor. After going over everything with me twice, Hartman fought against himself, which is what honest attorneys do. As your lawyer, he advised, take it. I would advise you to do it with both hands. Your record will be read aloud once more at a disputed hearing. You're 14 years old, and a guardian at litem may determine that the whole family is radioactive and suggest a neutral, qualified guardian. Can you see what it would mean? A group home with shift workers and a waiting list. If you win the battle, you may see her travel to the same location where your aunt used to frighten herself. Then he removed his spectacles. And as Ruth's lawyer for 40 years, he said, "I'll tell you, she did not leave that box sealed for it to stay sealed." I didn't decide in that office. I drove to the hospital and I laid it out for the one person every deal in this family had always been made around, never with. I used plain words and the tablet between us. Go home with me now and it stays quiet or we fight, and everybody will know everything, and fighting has a risk in it I can't erase. My sister listened with her whole stillness. Then she typed, and the flat little voice said, "No more secrets." She looked at me and waited because the signature still had to be mine. My family had spent 50 years buying safety with silence, and the bill always went to whoever couldn't argue. Now they were offering me the family discount. I said no on a Wednesday, and then I spent 3 weeks making the no survivable. I took the instructor job at the community college, teaching EMT students mornings, home by 3, weekends free, a schedule a judge could set a watch by, and turning in my truck keys at the station hurt in a place I don't have clean words for. 9 years that rig. Dana hugged me in the bay and said, "You're the best medic I ever ran with." And I said, "I know, that's the price." And we left it there, which is how medics say everything. Ella spent those weeks in a temporary respite placement arranged through the county board while Catherine stood suspended. A small staffed house where Rachel knew the manager and I visited every other day and hated every mile of the drive. I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom house 4 blocks from Bright Path, and Rachel walked the rooms with me, moving a lamp Ella would hate, flagging the strobing porch light, building a support plan page by page like a woman laying sandbags before a flood she'd seen before. Dr. Park wrote a capacity evaluation for the court, concluding that with her device, Ella could express preferences reliably, and petitioned for her to be heard at the hearing through it. And Hartman, on my written instruction, delivered the complete amended accounting, the pharmacy records, and copies of everything in my grandmother's box to the county prosecutor's office. Referral filed, receipt stamped before the hearing date. Understand what that meant. The deal's whole engine was silenced for safety, and we drove it off a cliff on purpose. There was no version left where anyone could offer me my sister in exchange for quiet, because quiet no longer existed to sell. The Guardian Snorts Adidum interviewed Ella 3 times with Rachel supporting, and her report went to the judge sealed. So we walked in blind on the one voice that mattered most. The hearing fell on a Tuesday. My family arrived in church clothes. They had spent 50 years rehearsing how to look. None of them had ever rehearsed being heard. Judge Maddox's courtroom is small, oak the color of strong tea, a ceiling fan that clicks on every 4th turn. It was full. My parents sat behind Prescott's table with the pastor between them like a character witness for the whole bloodline, and half the congregation filled the benches, and I had Hartman Rachel on the aisle, and Dr. Park reading her own notes like she was about to defend a dissertation. Catherine sat very straight and did not look at me once. Prescott went first, and he was worth whatever they were paying him. He didn't rant. He regretted. He regretted that a troubled young woman who once put her own father through a door now sought control of a vulnerable woman, and coincidentally her substantial trust. He regretted 14 years of absence rewritten as heroism. He walked the judge through me quitting a 9-year career framed as instability, a woman who changes jobs under pressure. And then he pulled the pin on the one I hadn't seen coming. "Your Honor," he said, "my clients offered this woman everything she claims to want, her sister, placed with her within days, and she refused because the offer asked one thing of her: discretion. What sort of rescuer declines a rescue unless she is permitted to burn the family to death?" It was enjoyable. The small movement of 50 spines at once was so amazing that I could feel the benches behind me believing it. He concluded by presenting the court with a reasonable off-ramp. If not Catherine, then a professional guardian who is impartial and a suitable residential placement that is organized, staffed, secure, and a group home that uses the kindest language possible. After writing for a while, Judge Maddox glanced over her spectacles at our table as the fan clicked. "I'll hear from you, Ms. Bennett," she said. With one hand on my sleeve, Hartman leaned into me as we ascended. He said, "Now or never." "Are you certain?" I glanced to the rail where my sister and Rachel were sitting, each holding a tablet like a hymnal. After 30 years of observing my family, I was certain that I had learnt one thing, and I used it against them. I told my worst version of the tale before Prescott could because the person who controls the worst version of the story now controls the room. I presented my record to the court on oath. No varnish, the screen door, the request. I gave them the 14 years of returned shipments, the 2 times when I drove away after sitting across from the business, and not a single one of those years was presented as anything but a failure. I informed Judge Maddox that I had failed her first. Everyone with my last name in this courtroom let her down. The difference is that I've finished working in silence. The whole room was waiting for me to take the offer, so I did. I said it's true. My sister was promised to return to me in a few days last week, but only if everything remained what my family refers to as confidential. My family has a proverb, Your Honor. Family implies that no one needs to know. I want the record to demonstrate the cost of that phrase, because I heard my mother utter it in my kitchen a month ago and over shattered glass when I was 18. My sister spent 4 years in a hotel room with a lock on the wrong side of the door, medicated for convenience, and behind a signature. Additionally, it cost Timmy Bennett, a 6-year-old kid, his whole life more than 50 years ago. He was the brother of my father. This family informed the community that he moved in with relatives and died in a state facility at the age of 9. Since then, he has been buried under a stone with the number 114, since no one can be embarrassed by a number. I could hear the fan clicking because the seats behind me had become so silent. My dad was looking at his hands. I put down the last of it after glancing at the judge. Ella was at ease in the closet, according to my parents. Calm was the entire issue, I said. Peace is not the same as quiet. Then I made a request that no one in the courtroom had anticipated. The lady who asked is the least of all. Not complete guardianship, restricted guardianship, health and safety only with her own physician, her day program, a supported decision-making plan, and an annual review. I responded, I'm not asking to own my sister's life. I would want to stand by it. She's had enough proprietors. I will be grateful for until I die, Judge Maddox stated after allowing the chamber to settle. Ella, would you like to answer? There is one person this court has not heard from. Prescott objected before Rachel was even out of her seat. Coached testimony, unreliable modality, the ward's documented suggestibility, and Maddox heard him out, and then noted that the court had ordered Dr. Park's capacity evaluation precisely for this question and had read it overruled, and the clerk patched the tablet's little speaker through the courtroom sound, and my sister came forward with Rachel beside her cracked screen and all. It is a particular kind of silence. 50 people listening to someone type. Each letter was a soft tap and the fan clicked and nobody breathed. She pressed her yellow button first, the one she built herself at a church picnic, and the flat voice said it to the rafters. I am not a secret. Then, tap by tap, her own words, no prompt, no menu, while the county watched her do the thing her family had spent 22 years saying she couldn't. I want to live with my sister. She knocks before she opens the door. I watched a baif, a big man with a face like a cinder block, blink hard and study the ceiling. Prescott rose again, gamely asked whether anyone could verify these were her words, and that's when Maddox opened the sealed report from the Guardian Addendum and read the summary aloud. 3 independent interviews, consistent expressed preference. The ward asks for her sister by name in every session. Recommendation. Placement with the sister under limited guardianship. Same answer, 3 times to a stranger with nobody from either family in the room. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mother make a small sound and go still. And Catherine, my aunt, the keeper of every gate, stood up in the middle of the benches, gripped the rail in front of her. looked at the yellow button glowing on that cracked screen for one long second, and walked out of the courtroom before the ruling, her heels very loud and her back very straight. She never said a word. Some people can only survive the truth at a dosage they can leave the room from. Judge Maddox squared the papers on her bench. I'm prepared to rule,